I see market failure and I see state failure. So 90% of the financial system and the commercial entities would go bankrupt right now if there wasn't a state. And both the supply chain and demand, and supply and demand are both, hit, which is unprecedented. But usually what you have is a supply crisis, then a demand crisis, then a supply crisis. So about every 30 years there's this, polarity inversion. This is both at the same time. This is, as far as we know, has never happened. There is a deep state failure, right? The inability of the state to plan for it. They even sold their stockpiles last year in the US and in France, in different countries. And so what I see, and this is from the peer-to-peer perspective, is a huge mobilization of makers and the open source world in order to compensate for the failure of market and state. This is what I'm monitoring. I have created a wiki section on the collaborative response to the COVID-19 crisis. Mm-hmm. But the institution, the protocols are not there. So you have all these people making masks and ventilators, and the hospitals are afraid to accept them because of litigation. Yeah. And so I'm advocating as an outcome for this kind of particular crisis, the generalization of public commons cooperation protocols. So mm-hmm. we need something like the Bologna regulation in Italy for urban commons, which mm-hmm. has been copied by 250 Italian cities, and has mobilized 1 million people in urban commons project so far. We need this for makers, right? We need a system that can allow the mobilization of civil society, and that these innovations can actually be then streamed into the system. Right now, there's so many roadblocks, mm-hmm. And people are dying because of it. Because they could have ventilators, and they're not getting them. Mm-hmm. And so you see also politicians like, especially in the US and England, they don't want to look at this. They're negotiating with these big companies who tell them it's going to take 6 months to make ventilators. Mm. And I can give you examples here in Brussels where, a colleague of mine in the P2P Foundation, in the board, it took them 1 week to set up a production line for masks. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And yet the system can't use it. In Belgium, we're lucky we have a green regional government. Mm-hmm. And so the green ministers accepted this and supported it and lifted all the administrative roadblocks. But in many countries, this is not the case. But so that's the opportunity side, right? That's the opportunity side for people like me, is that it can advance some of these reforms that we're now advocating for.
I'm wondering about this. Will corporations become good, like responsible global citizens? They're all making masks and gowns.
Yes, but that's like philanthropy, right? That's nice, but it's marginal to their structure and purpose. What we need, at a longer term, what we need is corporate reform. Mm-hmm. And there's many interesting solutions to this. One is, I strongly believe in the economy of the common good. So that's the proposal by Christian Felber.
Can you elaborate a bit that?
Yeah. Yes. So he looked at all the European constitutions, mm-hmm. and he said there's not a single European constitution that says that the economy should serve the shareholders. It literally says everywhere that the economy should serve the common good. Step one. Step two, he says, well, the common good is not metaphysical. We can actually make a democratic agreement amongst people about what we consider to be the common good. And then we translate that in an accounting system. So he developed a accounting system, impact accounting system, with 17 clusters of values to judge a company's activity. And they have already 2,000 organizations doing this. And this is very interesting because it means you don't have to change the corporation, you just judge them differently. And so taxation and subsidies are then made responsive to the impact. So if you have good impact, you pay less taxes, get more support. And that automatically then forces the corporate leadership to start working not just for profit maximization, but for their impact, because they're going to be judged and it will affect their capital situation as well. I think this is a brilliant intervention. If that would, succeed in becoming the law of the land, this is very interesting. There's similar proposals. There's one in France called compte care. So it's a care accounting that says the following. Today, if you have fiduciary responsibility to protect financial capital. So if you're a manager and you do badly with the financing, you're legally liable. But you're not liable for harming the planet and harming the people. So they want to make a legal reform which obliges companies to have a triple accounting, one with natural capital and one with human capital, and with a legal obligation to care for these forms of capital. That's another, it's another way, but it's also interesting. So we need those kinds of, because this is the issue, right? How do we deal with these big corporates? And of course, you could say let's abolish them, but the problem is they're performing such vital functions now that that's not a realistic option. But you could say, well, you can exist, but you will be judged differently by society in a legal, financial, tax way. I mean, I'm not saying that's easy to do either, because there's questions of power and stuff. But I think as a direction of thinking, I think it's very, very interesting to think that way. It's a triple transformation. How do we transform the state? How do we transform civil society? And how do we transform the market? And so we rearrange the logic of each. And so we are now capital state nation, capital at the helm. The state protects the meta logic, and then the nation is the community. And so in P2P theory, what I say is you have productive civil society, generative market, and a partner state, right? So we change all three, and we change the logic of interaction between the three, so that and it's a value regime change, where we now only recognize market value, and then we use taxation and philanthropy to fund generative and restorative work, which remains marginal in this scenario, to a situation where we structurally recognize non-market contributions, funded directly as an equal, because we can't live without extraction. We have to eat, to put it very simply. So we cannot have this ideal world when there's no extraction. But what we can do is that we can balance the extraction and the regeneration, right? Have a steady state, harmonious production system with strong safeguards. There is this project I really wanted to explain to you, which I think is very powerful. It's called Reporting 3.0. And what they propose is a global thresholds and allocations council. So the idea is, now we have weak multilateral institutions that mediate politics and finance, World Bank, United Nations. They advocate a strong multilateral framework for the protection of the planet. So this global thresholds allocations council is like the WHO. It's a council that measures the stocks and flows of matter and energy, right? Take into account thermodynamic realities and needs over several generations. So imagine they have a database of all the chemical elements, and they have how much stock we have, how much expected findings, the biocircularity level. If you reuse copper, you only have 70% of the copper you start with. And this is all in a database at a global level, and then it goes down, bioregional, continental, countries, co-ops, companies, cities, whatever. And so we get this kind of thermodynamic accounting as an obligatory framework for the human production system, right? So within it, we're free, but we cannot cross those boundaries, which are the critical planetary boundaries and the critical resources that we have to maintain over a long period of time. So this is the way I'm thinking, right? Stable system is disintegrating. Now we are in the chaotic interlude. And at the outcome is a compact between humanity and nature.
Mm-hmm.
And a stable, a steady state economy that can last for a long time.
But the steady state is not something what we are seeing at this moment. It's
No.
So I'm questioning also a little bit that concept. If you see what is happening in the United States, how the US, the federal and the state in Europe, the countries, where we thought we would, the United States of America and the United States of Europe are not acting at all.
No, but it could get worse before it gets better, right? That's the idea of a chaotic transition, is that the old institutions crumble, but then people, for survival reasons, choose another path. So I have a theory of history, which I didn't have last year, because I've been reading biophysical economics, Peter Pogani, cryodynamics with Peter Turchin, the Handy report from the United Nations, it's called Human and Nature Dynamics. And so I've come to the conclusion that human history is a wave, they call it wave pulse theory. Mm-hmm. So you have extractive regimes and restorative regenerative moments. And basically every class society which is in a competition in a peer polity will overuse its resources. It will collapse, which can take many forms. But for example, there's studies about China and the Maya civilization, where you just see they change capitals. And, when they overuse one region, they just move. So that's the way to get out of it. But anyway, the basic rule is this: over-extraction. And the more you over-extract, the more unequal the society, the deeper the collapse. Mm-hmm. The more equal, the shorter the collapse, the less severe, right? But you can get out of it. So this is like a pendulum. Mm-hmm. And there's, for example, Sorokin, which I haven't read, but I've read a summary. So he looked at history and he saw there was this kind of balance between, he called it sensate materialist civilizations and, what did he call it? Ideate spiritual civilizations, right? And it's the same thing. So you have a crisis, and you have people who will say we can't go on with this, mm-hmm. right? And they represent a new way, and that will last a certain time before the extractive thing comes out again. Now, my belief is that this is the rhythm in agricultural society. Capitalism thought it could escape it, mm-hmm. but the result is that we now have a global imbalance, which means that we actually need to get out of the cycle. So this is, in a way, an optimistic vision, right? So we have messed it up to that level that if we want to survive, we cannot just not even continue the extractive generative cycle. We really have to build the premises of a longer-term equilibrium. Mm-hmm. And so I think a lot of people are working on this. We don't have the power, but at the margins, the prototyping, I mean, there's so much innovation happening right now that, we will look back at it as an extraordinary period of flowering of, but how do we get there without deep suffering? That's the question. And I don't think that's going to be possible. I think we will have pedagogical catastrophes like this one. Mm-hmm. That will succeed each other, until we get it, basically, right? What we need now is a regime of strong multilateralism at a planetary level. That doesn't mean a world government, but it means, powerful multilateral associations. And in terms of peer production, the way to think about it would be to say, it can no longer just be interstate. Right? It cannot be international. It has to be also transnational, translocal. These institutions have to be integrate this other geography that we now don't recognize.
The complexity is not only related to states, but it's also the complexity of the situation is also related to the multi-layers. It's not just economics, it's ecological, it's like what you regularly, and it's for the viewer is also very interesting to follow your Facebook, because there every day you're posting super interesting feeds. Maria and I are following you. But what is was interesting, a couple of weeks ago, you posted a feed of Fritjof Capra that I found interesting, where he was describing the entanglement of all the different crises at the same time, which is it's the COVID-19 as the ultimate hyper object, you could almost say.
That's what put,
Yeah.
We don't have all the tools, but we have some of them, right? I mean, like the report I wrote last summer, P2P Accounting for Planetary Survival, my thesis was there that we actually have all the tools that we want for a global, economic system that can monitor. It's just a question of putting them together in the right way, and giving them power and influence, which they don't have for the moment, right? And so that's one of my concerns right now is, I call it the value regime issue, right? So we have capital accumulation, and what capital does, it limits it chooses where our creativity can go. So we need to come back to what Bernard Lietaer describes in his book, The Mystery of Money. And he says every pre-capitalist society had a double monetary system. Yin and yang currencies, warm and cold currencies. Like in Bali, they have a currency for the watershed management. And so one of the things we need to do right now is to recognize non-market contributions, generative contributions. So I'm working a lot around the idea of public ledgers, public accounting systems, where people can have their generative activity verified, tokenized, and financed. So typically, if you create a positive externality, public priority, like but you can also say, like Linux and IBM, you can say, well, IBM is profiting from Linux, therefore it is also funding Linux with 10% of its savings, creating a permanent stream to support the operating system. Yeah. So you could have, for example, the money saved in water pollution. And Terre des Liens did a study in 2016 in France. So they're saving the French state 300 million euro per year. Yeah. They don't get anything from this, right? If you would have a public ledger where people can lodge their activities and have it verified, and then the depollution agency would say, okay, we'll share 50% of our savings with that fund, right? What you then would have is a circular finance, positive feedback loop. And so this is the kind of thing we need to generalize, in my view. We need to, everywhere we can, we need to put in place these mechanisms so that the alternative generative practices become part of our society, become funded easily, and don't stay forever marginal.
But everyone seems to be thinking now that all this is a cue for a universal basic income.
I'm not against it. I think the basic income would be one of the ways that would allow people to do the transition, right? So once you have your basic, my idea, and I've seen this in France, for example, in La Creuse, where I have my family, there is a neo-rural movement. right? But you can do that if you have zero income. But if you have 600 euro, which is not enough to live, it might be enough to eat, and then you can have a strategy to get extra funding for your sheep and your whatever you want to do with your life, right? So I see a basic income as a recognition of non-market contributions. The idea is not a handout. No, every citizen, by his very life, actually contributes to the common good. You care for your children, you care for your elders, your neighbor, so I don't know if it's realistic right now, but I think I don't think it would be in any way negative. I think this would be important advance. Yes, it's one of the key mechanisms, for funding generative activity.